Right, before we speak to the Minister, let's quickly take you through some of the findings, right? On the 12th of December 2025, at the Redcliffe Verulam, you see that mosque there, 5 dead as well as 11 injured. And then you see in Doornkop in Soweto, this is where 3 people died and 3 injured. This is where a house was built on Dolomitic land. And Magnolia Sea Point, we see an incident there leading to 4 injured. And then in Omonde in Johannesburg, 9 people died as well as 6 injured. And then you fast forward to looking at some of what would have happened there and what were some of the findings of the investigations. For example, when you think about the Verulam incident, construction proceeded without approval. If you read what the minister had to say, very disturbing, some of what comes out there. Doornkop, a collapse that is linked to a sinkhole on high-risk Dolomitic land. Interestingly, that this particular land was in fact occupied. There was a house, there was a structure built there, but people then were compensated, moved out, and then another family moved in. How this was allowed to happen, it boggles the mind. And then you then look at this particular one in Magnolia, temporary formwork failed before inspection, and then in Omonde, structural steel deficiencies were in fact identified there. And when you look at some of what are some of the weaknesses when it comes to the investigations and what the investigation tells us has happened here, there's no shortage of laws, right? Safety laws are there, but in enforcement seems to be becoming a problem. The issues of limited oversight, also capacity gaps within municipalities. Accountability is a serious concern. That you heard the minister even speaking very hard on the issue of, you know, why then do you not just go further as opposed to just implementing the fines? There seems to be a need for accountability here. So better oversight. You're thinking of also, you know, when you think about the verification processes, these are also going to be quite critical as far as accountability is concerned. Tougher consequences for serious violations. The minister speaking about the importance then of making sure that, you know, you go further than just fines. Potentially this can help to, you know, hold people to account. So these are some of the findings that we have in fact seen. So let's bring in the minister and just have a conversation about this. Minister, good evening to you and thank you so much for your time. Perhaps we start with, you know, just the issue of Doornkop, for example, a house, you know, built on Dolomitic land. This was known, a family was relocated at some point before, but the structure remained, and then another family came to live there. The risks were clearly not managed, and I wonder if there was anything at all that the officials said as far as where the weaknesses were here.
Yes, on that point, you know, the municipality had an obligation to make sure that once those families that had been removed there for safety reasons, that then other people didn't come back and inhabit that land. And unfortunately, that was not the case, that another family just simply moved in and they did some renovations, and then there was a sinkhole that formed under that. So, I mean, I think it's very clear when you look at one of the big threads through these cases, outside of the one in Cape Town, because that wasn't a planning issue, is that municipalities have an extensive role to play to ensure that there are correct plans, that those plans are being executed, and that there is bylaw enforcement when it comes to the development of these projects. Or in the instance of Doornkop, that people who shouldn't be living there, that they should have been kept off of that land, it should have been fenced, or the house should have been demolished, quite frankly. But, you know, these failures that we see in some of these local municipalities are having dire consequences for for people, and that they're losing their life and being injured on sites.
Yeah, and I wonder from, you know, the work that was done with the investigations, because it's quite clear, even from what you said earlier on, that there are no shortages when it comes to legislation. Enforcement appears to be an issue here. So are you finding that it's a case of officials who are simply lackluster, don't know what they're doing, or are these officials who are not even aware of what the law is?
I think it's a couple of things. I think the first thing is around capacities in municipalities to enforce their own bylaws and building regulations. Now, in the case of Omonde or Redcliffe in Verulam and eThekwini, there were no building plans submitted for that. So the very moment that something like that started going up, and in the case of eThekwini, it was a 5-story concrete building, someone should have said, hang on a moment, as the building inspector or the control inspector for the area, I know nothing about this. I need to get on the site immediately and get to this. And that just didn't happen. And so therein lies the problem. With Omonde, and you just saw it now in a clip, there's a large electricity pylon there. Now, you cannot build within 50 meters of those electricity pylons. So the moment someone started building something next to an electricity pylon, there should have been a red flag that went up and said, this shouldn't be here, we need to investigate. But that often doesn't happen because, you know, people couldn't be bothered, or it is just that there is no capacity or resources in municipalities to do that. And that is a big problem. And that has to be addressed by municipalities. Yeah. And that's one of the issues that we take to them in this report, is that they need to tell us how are they going to remedy these situations in their local councils.
And I wonder then, especially when you think about, for example, these particular municipalities, the issue of capacity is one that often gets cited. But one would ask, was there an instance at all where, you know, you're finding during the investigations that people could be paid to look the other way, if at all, or also, if then you begin to capacitate them, how do you do that so that they don't even turn a blind eye?
Look, my job is not to speculate. I can only work on the facts, and I have no evidence to suggest that. But I think what is not within dispute is around the capacity issue. Now, we obviously want to help to make sure that the entire value chain of the built environment is adequately protected and staffed with competent and trained people. And so we're not saying to local municipalities, go and do this on your own. We're here to help. We want to help. You know, we are the custodians of the built environment, but we're also a cog in it. And there are many others, including local municipalities. And I think that we need to look at, you know, places that are getting it right. So, you know, are local governments budgeting correctly? Are they making enough money available to that? You know, people pay fees, you know, to submit those fees. Are they being ring-fenced for the purpose of actually ensuring that inspectors are employed? An inspector told me that they're responsible for an area that includes thousands and thousands of properties, and the chance of them getting to a new building site is remote. And so what it can't be is that, you know, you just get a fine because you get found out, or in the case of Monday, they tried to submit the plans after the accident had taken place, which was quite incredible. So, you know, we need to make sure that there is an incentivization for people to comply with the law and regulations, because we want to work towards a zero fatality situation in the construction sector. Yeah. That we then also have to make sure that, you know, that people know that if they do cross the boundaries that we put in place for people's safety, that there will be more serious consequences than just a fine that they can pay.
And Minister, briefly, what's the latest regarding the wall collapse in Inand?
What we said there, and I went to go and meet with the Shembe Church, is they're obviously a growing organization. I think that they're one of the biggest churches, not just in South Africa, but Africa. And when they have these different pilgrimage, many of their congregants flock to the sites. This one is in Inanda, as you said, and they are building accommodation for congregants to come to. Again, there were no plans, there were no interventions by the municipality. And here we've actually taken an approach to say, well, let's work with the church, let's help them understand why they need to comply with the law, why they need to have plan submission. So we're also a part of changing the culture that says, you can just build and get away with it. So, we actually see working with the church, the Shembe Church, as an opportunity to also pilot new models of partnership, where we know people are going to be doing a lot of construction. Let's work with you from the outset. Let's show you how it needs to be done, so that it's done correctly to protect congregants and workers as well.
Minister, appreciate your time. Thank you for speaking to us. Public Works and Infrastructure Minister Dean Macpherson.